welcome, Commissioner Peirce. Apologies,
Thanks,
I didn't
Neha.
see you over there.
No, I was here for your whole speech, which I loved. It was fantastic.
Well, I loved your speech from the
Thank you.
Science of Blockchain conference. How many people here read or heard of Commissioner Peirce's speech? It's, I think, really great. You should just Google peanut butter and watermelon. Excellent.
Probably the only thing that will come up.
Exactly. Excellent. Excellent tactic there, getting it to show up in Google searches. So maybe we can start by. Do you want to just give us a really quick summary, the high-level argument from that speech for people who didn't get a chance to read it?
Yeah, sure. And let me start by just saying that my views are my own views as a commissioner, not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners, or frankly, the rest of the government. That's probably important to say. I mean, I feel like in your speech, you said better what I was really trying to say, because you actually know the technology and I don't. But I, too, have been troubled by this fact that we have given up financial privacy as sort of, we've assumed that we don't have a right to that as Americans, which is bizarre because it's so core to so much of what we do. And not only have we given that up, but we've also, as you mentioned, we've deployed the private sector to spy on all Americans. And so if you are dealing with a financial company and you give them your data, the presumption is, well, you gave it to them, so you don't have any Fourth Amendment rights to protect that data. In fact, they're sort of on call to hand over information to the government all the time. And so this is very depressing to me. And so one thing that brought me a little bit of joy is the fact that there are now these technologies that first enable you to do things without having intermediaries, which means that you remove that link. And so I think that's a good thing. And then second, these newest technologies, I think, enable you to be very selective about who you share your data with and how, and that can be helpful. And I think also can be used in a way to get the government the information that we want the government to have to stop bad actors, right? There is a role that government has in playing to protect us from bad actors, whether those are foreign nation states or whether they're people here, or, you know, we see these pig butchering scams, those kinds of things. We do want government to play a role in stopping those things, and I think the technology can actually be helpful there. But I think we really do need to switch the framing to say that it is natural, as you said. We should expect people to want to protect their privacy. It should not be viewed as strange that you would not want your employer to know who you're donating to or which doctor you're going to. And I think we really haven't done a very good job of telling that story. And so really the speech was a call on us to use the technologies for good and explain to people why everyday regular people should be using these technologies.
And you've spoken out a lot about positive regulation and sort of constructive dialogues in the cryptocurrency space and the DeFi space and the blockchain space. Was there something that caused you to turn to privacy in that moment? You know, or is it a through line that's you've always found really important, or was there something you were?
Well, I mean, I think it is that I have watched in my role at the SEC, although we're not the administrator of most of these Bank Secrecy Act, AML type things. We do oversee it as it relates to the entities we regulate. And so I've been thinking a lot about what that really means, that you're engaging with your entity, with your intermediary with a level of trust, and really they're on the back end giving your information to the government. And again, a lot of what I hear routinely when I raise these issues is, I don't have anything to hide. You must have something to hide because you don't want it. And you're a regulator, which is really weird that you want to hide stuff. I think another area that this has really come up is we have something called the Consolidated Audit Trail, which is a monitoring mechanism that we can watch everything that happens in our stock and options markets. And we can tie the trades to individual people. And so this came up from a good for a good reason. We had a flash crash more than a decade ago, and we couldn't figure out what had happened, what had caused that. It took a long time to reconstruct that. And so, we thought, and this was before I was at the SEC in this capacity, but we thought, okay, let's have some sort of some people called it the Hubble telescope, so that you could watch everything that was going on in the markets. And, it seemed like, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. But then when you really think about it and you think, oh, someone gets to watch, and theoretically, they're not going to do this, right? They're not going to pick someone out and say, I want to watch everything this person does just because I'm curious about what this person trades in. But once you have the data and you have it in a database like that, and then, AI becomes so powerful, it becomes very easy to do just that, to watch what everyone is doing in the markets at all times. And I find that very offensive. And so I think that also catalyzed a lot of my interest in this area.
Yeah. Have you heard of the idea of the panopticon?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. It's this idea that even if no one is actually looking at you, you don't know that no one's actually looking at you, because it's possible that they could be, and it changes your behavior. Just living in that kind of world changes what you're willing to do or not do.
Absolutely. And I think we also don't want to live in a world where the government has information. We've seen what can happen in lots of places where government power can be used in a way that's not good. And so we do need to be thinking about that and protecting ourselves from that.
Yeah. So, okay, now I kind of want to turn to, I really enjoyed the speech, by the way, and actually several open source developers sent it to me. They were like, whoa, they were really impressed by people that I did not think followed what regulators said, sent me your speech. So
how sad is this world that we live in? That's what they're reading for fun.
No, I think it's great that they're reading it. They were really impressed. They really liked it. But now what I want to talk about is, how do we enact what you suggested in your speech, right? Okay. How do we actually do this? Because I was talking to someone in the audience, and we talked about policymakers and lawmakers, and I talked about how frustrating it was to deal with this process. And he's like, yeah, it's like trying to nail yogurt to a wall. And I was like, yes, thank you for that analogy. That's a great analogy. So what do we do? Can we really reform the BSA? Is that a possibility? What are the steps here? What should we be doing?
Sometimes I get very depressed and I say there's no way to do it, because you get people all across the political spectrum who are like, well, yeah, but we need to be able to go after the bad guys. So, and then when I say, well, we don't want to become like the bad guys in the process of going after the bad guys, right? So we want to make sure that we preserve what this country is about, which is about the dignity of every person, right? That's the key. And what does that mean? Dignity, part of what is dignity is that you get to choose who you want to spend your time with and who you want to share intimate details of your life with. And so I think we have to pull people back to this concept that we are a uniquely wonderful place because, and we've certainly had our problems in our history, right? But we as a people have confronted and corrected those problems when we have not treated human beings with dignity. And so I think reminding us of this is what we stand for, this is what binds us together as a people, and really taking this moment to say, and this piece of our regulatory apparatus really doesn't accord with that fundamental principle that binds us together. So I think bringing people back to first principles is a good thing. I actually am optimistic because I think crypto has raised a lot of these questions again, because we're trying to figure out how do you smash a Bank Secrecy Act, AML, KYC framework on top of something that has such a peer-to-peer element to it. And so I think it affords us an opportunity to rethink the whole thing. Another thing that a lot of people have pointed out is that although this is really costly and very invasive from a privacy perspective, it's not clear it's really that effective. There might be more effective methods. And so I think making that point as well. And then I think the new technologies are also promising. I think we have to be careful there because, a lot of people will say, well, this is great because we can just build in a regulatory, node so that they can watch everything on chain. And I'm like, whoa, don't concede that right away. Because I think that means, to me, that's not, and again, I don't know the technology the way that you all do, but I don't think that's a good idea. That sounds to me like you're building in a back door for the regulators to see everything. That doesn't sound like a good idea. So I think we have to be careful in how we do it, but I do think the new technologies offer a way to say to government, in situations where you need information, you can get it. That said, we also have to make the point that having barriers to getting information, for the government to get information, having frictions is not a bad thing. We do that on purpose so that the government doesn't just sweep up masses of information. And so building in the notion that, it's okay if law enforcement, if regulatory agencies like mine have to do a little bit of work, because they should be doing that work because it explains the value of privacy. If you can get stuff easily, it seems like it's caught, like there's nothing really valuable there. If you put a barrier in place, it suggests there's value. But I think those of you in this room have a lot of work to do on this. I mean, I can't tell people to go lobby for things. That's not my position in my current spot. But I do say, if this is something that matters to you, you've got to talk to my colleagues here in Washington and explain that it really does matter, and that you are not in the boat of, well, I don't have anything to hide, so anyone can see anything.
Yeah. I think something you said in there is really important, that thing with the regulatory node idea. I think, honestly, we have to be honest about how the tech works, how we want it to work, and we have to be honest about when things are going to be hard, right? And I think that the crypto community, the blockchain community, there was a little bit of double speak almost around the conversation around privacy, because I remember people saying, actually, everything's so public. It's great. You can see everything that's happening on a blockchain. You could run a node. You could be part of this. And, that was a way of trying to convince policymakers and regulators not to be afraid of the anonymity. But you got to be honest, that's not what we're aiming for here, right?
Well, and because I've made that argument too, and then I'm always kind of thinking I shouldn't be making this argument because, they're privacy protecting coins, which is a good thing, right? We want there to be privacy protecting chains, and I don't want to, then I'm going to have to go back and say, well, actually, but I think my view was, well, you get people started to use this kind of stuff, and then they start to see, oh yeah, I actually want a privacy protecting chain myself because I don't want everyone to see what I'm spending it on. But I think you're right. We're not always honest. And I think also because the regulatory environment has been so hostile, people are just like, we'll do whatever just so that you give us the regulatory blessing. And I think we need to be playing a longer game than that.
Yeah, maybe. So that would be, if I could ask industry to do one thing, I would say, you got to be intellectually honest and consistent. You can't say this technology is so public and it's great, while at the same time really thinking that privacy is important and we should fight for it. You got to be honest about that and not tell two different stories. I'm curious, you've been going on this tour, right? And visiting a lot of different cities and talking to a lot of different people. Is there something that you wish that people would do differently or would do more of, maybe in the more positive sense? How has that been for you?
Well, I wish I've met with wonderful people, so this is not a criticism of the full range of people I've met with, but I really wish people would take this moment where we have a bit of, policy, a favorable policy attitude toward crypto to build really important things that people want to use. That's really my message, because I think that is actually the best way to protect what you all are building, to show people that they want to use it too. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in the name of crypto that's really horrible. And some of it's not horrible. Some of it is just like, okay, people are gambling and they're doing it in crypto, and that's fine. People can do what they want. But if you're trying to convince someone of the value of something, especially in a country like this where we have, our payment system works pretty well and we don't have hyperinflation, although sometimes it seems like it when I go to the store, but we don't have hyperinflation yet. So I think the fact that there are a lot of people in a lot of other places in the world for whom things like Bitcoin have really been transformational, and stable coins now have been transformational in their lives and really matter a lot. It's harder to make that case in the US, but I think the more real stuff you build, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Let's create real value for real people. And, gambling's not my cup of tea. I don't go to a lot of casinos. I understand some people find value and fun in that, and that's fine. You have the right to do that, and I fully support your right to do that. But, we can't get lost in thinking that's the only use case. I think that there are other use cases too. If I recall correctly, you're willing to open it up to the audience for questions. So maybe start thinking about your questions, and we'll get to that in a minute. So one thing I want to ask, and this is a little bit of a challenging one: how do we counter the framing that the world will be less safe with more privacy? Do we believe that might be true? But look, it's important. It's a principle we should fight for. We have to deal with it. We have to figure out how to deal with it. Or do you think that's maybe even the wrong framing? How do you think about that, and how do you have these conversations?
I mean, I do think it's the wrong framing, but at the same time, I take to heart your point about being intellectually honest, right? We need to be honest about the fact that sometimes when you put privacy protecting things in place, it does make it harder to find people who are doing or trying to do bad things. It does. People often will go to a country that's very authoritarian and they'll be like, oh, the streets are so clean. I can walk there at night. There's no, there's no crime there. And there's a reason for that, right? And so I think we need to acknowledge that sometimes a life in which we prize freedom means it's also a life in which there are bad things that happen. And we as a community have to rally around each other when bad things happen and help them. But that doesn't mean that we put in place this, this very authoritarian system. But I do think it's the wrong framing, because if if really you believe that, then why are you locking your doors? Because the police should be able to walk in anytime they want, because something bad might be happening inside. And so I think we think about it when it comes to financial privacy very differently than we do in this area. It's also, another thing that I talked about briefly in the speech is that initially cryptography was viewed as so dangerous to have in private hands that, it could only be in government hands. And there was a real fight by people who are very, I think, courageous to have that fight and say, no, this is really important that private parties be able to use cryptography. And that has changed all of our lives. The fact that they won that battle changed all of our lives. We wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we do now if we didn't have that. And so I think it's this kind of moment where we have to make that case again. And it's not easy, but I think there's some really powerful proponents who can get out there and make the case, with analogies that people can understand.
I like it. All right, let's open it up to questions. Any questions? Yeah, I'll rely on Zach. Go ahead. Yeah.
First off, thank you for saying the things that you've been saying as someone who builds privacy-preserving tools. It's, you don't see it from every jurisdiction and every regulator, so very much appreciated. You must encounter in your job, in your colleagues, or other people in government, quite a lot of people who either don't really think about privacy or maybe actively dislike what you're saying. How would you explain your mental model of those people? Like how should I think of why they have this maybe hostile view or kind of they don't care about preserving privacy?
Well, I think one, they may not have thought too much about it. And it is true that sort of financial privacy has been eroded over time. And that's really the area that I see it most, right? It's been eroded over time, and it's like boiling a frog analogy, right? You don't really realize it. But I think a lot of it too is just, there's a compliance mindset in most regulators, right? We have rules, people are supposed to follow them, and that's natural that regulators think that way. But you can sometimes lose the plot, right? We want compliance, but only if the rules make sense and only if so we should constantly be thinking, do these rules that we're telling people they have to comply with actually make sense? And it can be hard to do that because you're thinking about adopting new rules, not revisiting old rules. But I think there's also just really a deep care for people. So I think of we're shut down now. The government is shut down, and so I'm one of the few people who's at the SEC, and I've been answering phone calls this week, and it is really disturbing because I get a call from a woman who her husband had died. He had handled all the finances, but she knew he had done some crypto trading, and so she wanted to make some money, and so she did some crypto stuff. She got scammed 3 times in a row. And then the 4th time was someone has a Telegram profile of me, and they're offering to help people who have been scammed to get their money back. Isn't that wonderful? And all they have to do is deposit some money, which will then be gambled in a casino in Macau, and that will yield profits that will get them their money back. And this is all in my name, right? And so I'm thinking, like, why would someone ever believe that this is how the government would go about getting your money back? But, this woman was just a very kind, you could tell, just kind-hearted woman. And she's like, I knew that my husband made money in crypto, and I just don't understand why it's not working for me. And I said, don't put any more money into that. Like, don't give them any more money because they try to bleed you dry to get every last dollar. She had borrowed money from a friend. And I said, and this kind of ties back to something that you said in your remarks. I said, go to someone in your real life and like double check if you're going to invest in something. And then I'm thinking, well, that person could be a scammer too, but at least it's less likely that, like, if you've known a person, it happens. We see those kinds of scams too. But then she said, well, but how do I know you're real? And I thought, that's a pretty good question because I was
asking the right questions.
The SEC, when you call, you can't see my phone number. It gives a different phone number. So the number she had called was different from the number I was calling her from. And I'm like trying to explain this to her. And then I said, if you come to DC, you can meet me in person. But I said, but don't come to DC because you don't have any money right now to spend to come to DC. So, but I mean, it's we see those kinds of scammers and bad actors all the time. And so it's very hard when this is what you do much of your week is review these enforcement actions against these really bad actors, to then say, and I want to make it harder for regulators to catch them. So I think it really is about reframing the conversation and saying, this is about protecting regular people, going about living their regular lives. And it is valuable, and we do have to accept that there's going to be a cost to that. I think this country has really, we've prioritized security over freedom in a way that's very understandable. It's nice to live secure lives, but freedom is really closely tied with human dignity. So we have to make that case.
I think maybe we have time for one last question. Is that right? You pick. Yeah, whoever put their hand up first.
There you go. Hi, Hester. I'm Blake. I'm curious. I think a lot of understanding cryptocurrency comes from using it. And I'm kind of curious what your opinion is on whether government employees should be allowed to use cryptocurrency.
Yes.
That was an easy one.
That was the easy one.
Okay.
While we're here.
All right. Thank you so much, Commissioner Peirce. One thing I really admire is your stance on support for individual freedom that you were just talking about. And so given what we're seeing in countries like China with CBDCs, social credit, the UK implementing digital IDs, what do you think are the most important things we can do here to ensure that the US doesn't drift in the same direction as those countries?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because it is very some of that, again, seems like it makes life easy for people. I think having competition is important, and that's something that you don't have if the government is the only one who gets to decide whether you get credit or decides whether you get to, go to a certain place, right? So I think having competition there is probably the best protection that we can have. But I think that's something we all have to keep thinking about and watching out for.
All right. Just in the interest of keeping with time, I think we have a coffee break now. So, you might get a chance to ask Commissioner Peirce more questions directly. But thank you so much for being here and for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
It was really great.
I appreciate it. Thank you all very much for the work you're doing.